Hi, I'm Arash and this is Game Narrative 101, a channel where we analyze how video games tell stories. There is a gap in our understanding of the types of narratives that video games have. And if you want to know where that gap is, ask yourself, just as an example, what is the story of Crusader Kings III? In this video, I will argue that we need a new category of game narratives called Rhizomatic to analyze this game. So I'm going to talk a bit about Crusader Kings III and why it's not linear or branching. Then I'm going to define the term Rhizomatic, give some examples and some analyses, and show you why it's important to recognize this category and how it could be helpful to you as a developer, reviewer, scholar, or player. So let's begin. Crusader Kings is a grand strategy series, but I'm only using the third installment in this video because it's the most recent one. In this game, you choose your avatar from historically accurate rulers as small as counts or countesses or as big as emperors or empresses. There are no plots or objectives in this game. You may lose the game if you lose all of your titles, at which point you just change your character and continue, but you can never win. It's up to you what you want to do. The game doesn't define that for you. So, the story of Crusader Kings III is neither linear nor branching, because you can change the outcome, so it's not linear, and there are no pre-scripted branches, so it's not branching. So what is it then? Pretty much the only answer I've ever heard, and the one thrown around in marketing campaigns all the time, is something like the player makes the story. This isn't really a practical answer though. Sure, you make the story in Crusader Kings III, but you can't literally make any story. So what are the limitations? How limited can it get before you can't tell your story anymore? How can you learn from Crusader Kings III and achieve or notice the same thing in other genres? We know what playing this game feels like, we know how it works, but we don't know why. In other words, we don't have trouble reviewing games like Crusader Kings III, but we don't have the tools or the language to analyze them. Well, in my MA thesis, which was on, game narratives, I had to develop this tool, which came in the form of a new category of games called Rhizomatic. Let's see what it means. In their book, 1,000 Plateaus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, philosopher Gilles Deleuze and psychoanalyst Philippe Guattari comment on the idea of rhizome as follows. It is composed not of units, but of dimensions, or rather directions in motion. It has neither beginning nor end, but always a middle or milieu, from which it grows and which it overspills. If you want to visualize it, take a look at this picture of neurons. There is a system in there, but does it have a beginning or an end? Does one of the clumps come first, then another second? No, it's just an interconnected system. Based on this definition, I define rhizomatic games, in their purest form, as games with no fixed points of origin or destination for their narratives. They're neither linear nor branching. In these games, you're dropped in the middle of a bunch of game mechanics with no beginning, no objectives, no final bosses, no ending, no order in which things have to happen. Your interaction with the game mechanics, the act of play itself, is what makes the story. And this defines Crusader Kings III perfectly, by the way. But there's a question here. Things are fine, games are made. And the end result of my description of this new category was that the player tells the story which we already knew. So why exactly do we need a semi-complicated definition for a new category at all? For me, the answer is practical. I don't care about the strict category games fall under. But developing the language to analyze rhizomatic games means we can ask the right questions and find out why they work the way they do. It means we can zero in on the qualities that make them so engaging so that we can transfer those qualities to other games from other genres. Recognizing this structure makes it easier for vastly different games to take inspiration from each other and make each other better. A clear example of this are branching game narratives. Role-playing games always included player choices in story branches, skill trees, open world maps, level ups, class choices, and so on. Slowly though, linear action-adventure games started incorporating a bunch of these systems and mechanics to increase player engagement. They could do that for two reasons. First, it is easy to spot branching narratives. It is obvious both that there are choices and where they occur. But second is that we already knew branching narratives from books. This is part of what made them so easy to spot in the first place. We already knew this category existed, so we knew how it worked. We knew that good branching narratives gave the audience meaningful choices that changed the course and outcome of the story. So, when developers wanted to make their linear games more interesting, they knew which systems or mechanics they had to adapt to evoke those feelings. So, when we look at a good branching game, say the first Fallout, we don't just say, oh, Fallout lets you tell your own story and leave it at that. Because we have the language to analyze it, we know why it can let you tell your story. It has an open world, physical and mental attributes, different factions, and many different scripted ways to advance the plot. So, if we take one, some, or all of these and put them in our own game, we can make a branching game that's engaging but doesn't even feel like Fallout because these are all abstract ideas and are not tied to any franchise, theme, or genre. Recognizing the Rhizomatic category paves the way for us to do just that. To demonstrate this, I'm going to name two games that I bet you never even mentioned in the same sentence together. I don't think anyone believes there are any similarities between these two. One is Crusader Kings III and the other is Her Story. Now, I'm going to analyze both these games in detail in future videos dedicated to them, but let's look at them for a bit. We already know how Crusader Kings III is a Rhizomatic game. No plot, no beginning, no set path, no end, you're just dropped in the middle and have to move in any direction. Her Story is a bit different though, as it is not purely Rhizomatic. It has some of the features of Rhizomatic games and is missing some others, but we need to understand its Rhizomatic features if we want to learn how it tells its story. If you don't know the game, I'm gonna give you a brief description and you're gonna see what I'm talking about. Her Story is a detective game where you have to trudge through short video clips of police interviews with a murder suspect. The clips are taken from 7-hour or so long interviews and you access them by typing a single word in the virtual database of the game. If the suspect said that word in one of the interviews, a maximum of 5 clips are going to show up in chronological order. You watch them and continue until you come to a conclusion and stop playing, or until you watch all the clips, but you never submit your conclusion to the game. The game doesn't tell you yay you got it or no try again. It just lets you put together a story from fragments it gives you and then lets you leave thinking you know the objective answer, that you know the story. Now, as you can see, the game isn't purely Rhizomatic because it comes to an end and the game starts with the word murder already in the search box. Also, it has some direction in the form of restricting your accidental access to later clips by limiting the number of clips your search brings up and making them chronological. However, much like Crusader Kings III, we cannot categorize this game as linear or branching. Sure, maybe not every feature of the game is Rhizomatic, but there are enough Rhizomatic features in there that, for my money, make Her Story Rhizomatic. And that is what makes it one of the best detective games ever made. I'm gonna discuss this in more detail in its own future video, but the Rhizomatic structure makes it possible for players to act way more like authors than audiences, and that strengthens the fantasy of being a detective. On the other hand, Crusader Kings III uses the same category for a different purpose. Again, we will talk about it in its own video, but this time the Rhizomatic structure shakes up the grand strategy genre and focuses more on individual characters and the player's morality. In both cases, these games bring an unprecedented degree of player interaction to the construction of their stories, and it is beneficial to understand the structure to notice or create the same thing in other genres. So, let's brainstorm a couple of ideas for how you, as a developer, could make your game better with a touch of Rhizomatic. For example, what if you make a sci-fi horror game, maybe like Dead Space, but Rhizomatic? So instead of telling the story to the player, we let them roam around and come up with the story in their heads. Maybe even randomize their start somehow. Sure, the game could have an ending, but the story could be put together by the player as they find bits and pieces of it, like in Her Story. Or maybe we can make a Rhizomatic Lovecraftian horror game where the Rhizomatic bits simulate the confusion and lack of knowledge of the character, thereby maybe actually making the player paranoid instead of just saying this character is going insane. There are so many Rhizomatic games out there, from CK3 and Her Story to Minecraft and The Sims, and there are also so many genres unexplored by this category. And I'm sure you can come up with better ideas, so I'll just stop with the examples. In conclusion, video game narratives fall under 3 major categories: linear, branching, and rhizomatic. Players cannot change the plot of linear games. Branching games provide a few scripted narrative paths players could choose, and rhizomatic games let players choose unscripted narrative paths and make their own stories. Strictly rhizomatic games don't have a beginning, middle, end, or an order in which things happen. They're a collection of mechanics that come alive when players interact with them. We're going to discuss rhizomatic structure more when we analyze rhizomatic games, so please subscribe to catch those. Also, please follow us on Twitch. We record game footage there, write and edit scripts, talk about future videos, and just play games. Same name, link in the thing below along with Discord and Twitter. It's fun, come over. Use like and dislike and the comment section to let me know what you thought of this video. Did I miss something? Can you think of other rhizomatic games? Let me know. Anyway, I hope to see you here again, and until I do, take care of yourselves, stay healthy and happy, goodbye.